Hey, Zane Griggs here. Have you heard about the article NPR blasted it out there, but it actually came out in JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, Internal Medicine, about how the sugar industry 50 years ago funded research that skewed the focus away from sugar, okay, sucrose, table sugar, added sugar, to as a cause of heart disease, and skewed away from sugar and towards saturated fat and dietary cholesterol. So if you haven't seen that, I'm going to give you a few details here, but I'm going to post the links in the comments to both the JAMA article and the NPR article. But quick overview, I actually got a lot of details for you. So like I said, JAMA just came out with this, and they found documentation for this. So of course, I couldn't interview a lot of them because there were a lot of these people involved have passed away since, because this was 1965. Okay, so 50 years ago, what they found out is stuff that we're trying to, I'm trying to get the word out now, which just seems to be news to people now because we've got 50 years of misinformation. Because they found that sugar was actually a cause of increased serum cholesterol, increased triglycerides, and that if high blood triglycerides or serum triglycerides is actually a risk factor for coronary heart disease, as we know it is, then sugar is definitely basically a contributor to atherosclerosis, to hardening of the arteries. Basically that's it. If triglycerides, high triglycerides is a risk factor, which we accept, sugar is a contributor to heart disease. Plain and simple. And they found a couple other things out. If the blood glucose, actually they determined, your blood sugar is actually a better predictor of heart disease than your blood cholesterol, serum cholesterol, or your hypertension or blood pressure. So probably because high blood sugar and what creates high blood sugar causes those other things. Those are symptoms, and other things can cause those symptoms. But blood sugar was more specific to a risk for heart disease than either hypertension or your cholesterol levels. So it's pretty, I mean, that's far and away from what we've been told over the last 5 decades. Another interesting thing I thought, again, 50 years ago, this is what blows my mind, they found that sugar's effect on blood cholesterol levels, okay, was actually created in the way it affects our biome in our intestines. So you've maybe heard me talk about this before, but our biome is the bacteria living in our bodies, most of them in our gut, and they outnumber us 10 to 1 of bacteria to human cells. So for every 1 million human cells, you got 10 million bacteria. That's your biome. So that's why people take probiotics, drink kombucha, eat lots of vegetable fiber, because the vegetable fiber creates the good bacteria. Sugar creates the bad. That's how they found sugar was affecting that disease by changing the biome in the gut. Okay, 50 years ago, blows my mind, because we're just now coming back to the biome as a predictor of disease, or as a cause of what kind of diseases you get, to the point that there are people doing poop transplants, okay, for people who are suffering from obesity and diabetes, and reversing obesity and diabetes by putting the feces from someone with an extremely healthy diet into a person who's had not such a healthy diet and is suffering from obesity and diabetes, and reversing those, okay, changing the direction of their illness. So just through basically taking the bacteria that resides in that healthy poop and putting it into the unhealthy person. So to know that we find that 50 years ago and it was suppressed kind of makes me a little angry, actually. So here's what they did. They started by putting they're doing this research through Harvard's Department of Public Health and Nutrition, and they put the chair of Harvard's Public Health and Nutrition on the Sugar Research Foundation's board. Okay, so he's on the payroll. And then they have the documentation that their strategy was to replicate these same studies that these people were doing. So you had two main groups. Let me back up. You had two main groups back then, two schools of thought. There was Ansel Keys, who was famous for pushing the saturated fat and cholesterol in your diet as the cause of heart disease. Then you had Yudkin, who's a British researcher, and the Iowa group in the US, who were finding that sugar, and they found all those things I just mentioned, sugar was the cause of, or the primary cause and contributor to heart disease. Okay, And so what they did is they wanted to replicate these, the sugar industry, Sugar Research Foundation, replicated the same research that Yudkin and the Iowa group did, but they made, the appropriate corrections to their findings, and which basically means skewed it towards, away from sugar and towards saturated fat and cholesterol. So they made the appropriate corrections and wrote articles about it, finding ways to discredit Yudkin and Iowa group's findings about sugar. And they got it published in the New England Journal of Medicine. So that basically solidified. You got Harvard and you got the New England Journal of Medicine saying, yes, this is the way it is. But they were both funded. The research is funded by them. The Harvard chair of the department is actually directly funded by them, by the sugar industry. And some of their arguments, because, they're just silly. Yudkin and Iowa group found that their dietary interventions into both healthy people and those suffering from heart disease already, their dietary interventions were to add or replace sugar with fat or eating more vegetables, believe it or not. And the sugar industry the funded research found that those were just not realistic interventions, that people wouldn't really substitute more vegetables or more fat for eating sugar. I don't know. I think I could, but the other question was whether someone started eating a low-fat diet, would that cause them to eat more sugar? And the sugar industry research found that's just not realistic. People start eating low-fat doesn't mean they're going to eat more sugar. That's not realistic. They're going to increase their sugar intake. Well, of course, we know that's not true also. So, the arguments were thin, but the funding was heavy, and the influence was there, which of course led to Ansel Keys being made the predominant researcher of the time, and Yudkin, which was another part of their strategy, was to bring these detractors of their research before a board of their peers and basically invalidate their research and discredit them, which is what they did to Yudkin. Making Ansel Keys the guy, and then of course George McGovern in the 70s when he came up with these new dietary guidelines. He had his big committee, and they're coming up. This is when the attack on saturated fat and cholesterol as the cause of heart disease started coming from the government, with George McGovern's big a committee, and they came up with the Dietary Guidelines, which attacked cholesterol and saturated fat. Now, of course, if you've been paying attention to Dietary Guidelines, it didn't get a lot of press, so you may not have heard this. But as of 2015, just last year, the same Dietary Guidelines for Americans basically say cholesterol is no longer a nutrient of concern, and we don't need to worry about saturated fat either. It's not really a cause of heart disease. So they've reversed. Unfortunately, the funding, from the sugar industry in different aspects, different departments of the sugar industry, which has changed names a few times, but they've kept it up. They've kept up their same shenanigans. They've funded dental research, which tried to disconnect the link between sugar and cavities. Believe it or not, there was a candy association which tried to basically they funded research that showed that kids who eat candy had healthier body weights than kids that didn't. And as recent as last year, CocaCola funded research that tried to separate sugary drinks from obesity. There's no link. I'm trying to say there's no link between sugary drinks and obesity, funded by our favorite Coca-Cola. So yes, this continues. Fortunately, some of the guidelines have been reversed from our government sources. Who's listening? I don't know. It didn't get a lot of press. But hey, eat the fat, lower the sugar. That's what they found 50 years ago. That's what they're finding now. Take care of your biome. Take some probiotics. Eat lots of veggies to keep them healthy. And that's how we fight disease. Okay, those preventable diseases in our bodies like heart disease and cancer, especially coming on us, and obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer's, which is type 3 diabetes, right? It's being called type 3 diabetes, all stemming from, now, of course, there's other sources for some of these diseases. Don't get me wrong. Obviously, smoking causes lung cancer, but sugar is definitely a cause of several of these diseases. The root cause, the inflammation and the chemistry that happens in our bodies when we eat too much sugar, can lead to any one or more of these diseases. Okay, so I'm tempering my words because obviously it's not all coming from sugar, but sugar is a cause. Okay, and they found this, like I said, just for heart disease 50 years ago. So, hey, if you know somebody wants to hear this or needs to hear this, I'm sure you must, because I found it just mind-blowing. Share. Please share. Leave the name in the comments. And please, if you found this valuable, like my page. And I'd love to hear comments from you. I'd love to hear questions. And again, I will post the links to these articles in the comments below. Talk to you later.